Hello and welcome to this special weekend edition of APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. We begin in the Northwest Territories, where residents gathered in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Charlotte Moore Jacobs takes us to Yellowknife for that story.
Each ribbon pays tribute to a sister stolen too soon. Over the next few days, Tree of Honor ceremonies are taking place in each region of the Northwest Territories. Supporters in Sambake, Yellowknife are here to remember missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
My name is Councillor Stacey Arden Smith.
And share personal stories.
And I looked at the men coming for me, and I looked at Portage. And I decided to take my chances, and I darted across that road. Those men jumped into that vehicle, and they went up to the next turn, and they swung a Yui. And I ran as fast as my feet could carry me, and I prayed to the Creator, make me fly.
Stacey Smith reflected on being a student in Winnipeg and reaching a bus stop just in time.
I remember feeling terrified, and I saw that truck slowly pass by the crowd, and they scanned for me. And I sat there praying, please don't let them know I'm here. Please don't let them catch me, because I feared that if they did, that they would drag me out of that crowd and nobody would have cared. I was one of those lucky ones that night.
Organized by the Status of Women Council in the NWT, Carolyn Wozniak spoke of the Territory's work in developing its own action plan in response to the MMIWG inquiry, but recognizes past failings to address core issues.
I am conscious that governments can and have too easily slipped into talking only to one another, drafting strategies, but failing to translate our strategies into implementation. But there does appear to be support and willingness at all levels of government to do what is right and necessary to...
The final report of the MMIWG National Inquiry included 231 calls to justice. Many of those needed to be taken by governments, organizations, and communities. Ruth McCurdy chose to speak at the individual level, looking ahead to end the genocide and honor loved ones.
Well, I just want to start out by honoring some of the family members that we have lost to this cycle of violence. And one of them is Janelle McCurdy and her sister Shelley McCurdy, and my daughter Deanna Mickelson, and my niece who we just lost not too long ago, Alexa Lindbergh. And I want to honor these ladies and all the other missing and murdered women that are out there.
Charlotte Moore Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
On October the 9th, one day before World Mental Health Day, Sioux Valley Dakota Nation in Manitoba declared a state of emergency because of the alarming number of deaths by suicide. The nation held a suicide prevention walk to show support to those who have lost loved ones. Here's the story from Sioux Valley Dakota Nation.
A memorial song began what was a day of support in Sioux Valley Dakota Nation as the community held a suicide prevention walk. The community has seen 15 suicide attempts since January, and 6 people have died by suicide since March.
So it definitely raised some red flags that, we need to do more. We need to provide more mental health services here in the community, and relying on our health team, our health professionals, to get their insight on what we need to do to ensure that all those services are provided.
The community declared a state of emergency October 9th, stating they need help. Indigenous Services Canada confirmed they will provide $141,000 to Sioux Valley for mental health services. However, Bone says that is not enough money to cover the necessary resources they need, like 4 new mental health workers and a healing lodge. Sioux Valley Health Director Margaret Roselli believes past trauma combined with COVID-19 has led to problems like suicides in not only Sioux Valley, but other Indigenous communities.
Well, I think it's well known in the many studies that have been done, the things that have happened to us in the past, that it's due to the intergenerational trauma that we've suffered through, the Indian agent coming to live and telling us how to live our lives, and then having the 60s scoop in the residential schools and all those different assimilation practices that have been put upon us. And it's all been in our DNA.
Joanne McKay has lost a family member in the past from suicide. She believes community gatherings like this, while under unfortunate circumstances, can help the well-being of the community in these times.
I think we need more walks in anything. We just need more walks, because then it shows that, yes, these people care enough to come out in the cold, in the wind, to go for a short walk. Maybe I can call one of them if they need to call somebody. They'll remember who was on the walk. That kind of thing.
An emergency response team arrived in the community to offer support and services as needed, and a second full-time mental health worker position is being added in the community.
It's time for a short break, but coming up, a look back at issues still lingering that were ignited by the so-called Oka crisis. Welcome back. 30 years ago, the so-called Oka crisis ignited an international media firestorm. For years, community members would grapple with the sensationalism, or as some might say racism, so prominent in the mainstream media coverage of 1990. Issues that persist today. Lindsay Richardson brings us this story of how 4 members of the Mohawk Nation are each in their own way working to change it.
We're tired of that. We're taking a stand, and this is what they give us.
I've done it for 30 years, every single anniversary. So the people who are interviewing me, they could just go back from the year after, 10 years later, and I'm saying the same thing.
We've tried to talk to them, and our voice is falling on deaf ears.
Our words fall on deaf ears. And that includes the media. It's kind of frustrating on my side that I have to keep doing this and reiterating, this is our land. It was never given up. This land is being stolen right from under us.
They want people to get hurt over a golf course. Native people are fed up.
According to Canada's history books, it was around this time 30 years ago the 78-day siege known as the Oka crisis came to an end. But for the Mohawks at Ganazadage, the fight for land and title didn't end when the cameras turned off, or when the mainstream media stopped paying attention.
They show in how they present their stories that they actually have no understanding of the profound and deeply multi-generational conflict that exists here, and that it's really about the land.
In 2020, community members are resisting construction at a development site on unceded land. But without the media draw of the 1990 crisis, Ellen now resorts to her own means to get the message out.
Sago, Wacha, Walalen, bonjour. My name is Gazitsagwas Ellen Gabriel, and I'm here at the illegal development site.
The videos often garner hundreds, sometimes thousands of hits.
Social media has been used quite powerfully by the youth, and I saw that Live was getting a lot of attention, and people could tell their story with their own voices. I spend hours or time with the media to explain to them, and they show 3 seconds. I figured social media is the best place to have our voices really heard and understood by everybody who's interested in the truth. This is pavement. Perhaps that belongs to the municipality of Oka, but the ground underneath belongs to us. And that's it. It's very difficult. The media doesn't get it. We're still viewed as a very divided community. We're still viewed as being the radicals, and I'm still happy to be called a radical.
Believe it or not, I was called a radical a long time ago, so I didn't know I was insulted or not. And I looked up radical, and radical says returning to roots or returning to fundamentals. And so I don't have a problem with us being called radical, because that's what we are.
Kenneth Deere played media point person for just 3 days in 1990, but learned quickly what story reporters were interested in.
They tried to find weaknesses and try to distract the issue. Say, well, is it really about the land, or is it about cigarettes, or about something else? The media seemed to be focusing on guns and masked warriors and wearing camouflage. And that wasn't really the issue.
And this ain't a surrender either.
Once the siege ended, there was struggle to set the record straight.
I remember in the past, you would, if you put an op-ed in a paper and you asked to be paid for it, they'd say, well, you should just be grateful that it's being published,
Deere's not the only one critical of the media treatment of 1990. The book Seeing Red examines 400 years of Canadian newspaper coverage. Of Oka, it says. For the first time, a sustained counter-narrative emerged, one which engaged and challenged colonialism fully. But it was difficult to hear amidst the roar of colonial-style reportage. Not much Indigenous journalism existed at the time of the 1990 siege. 2 years later, that would change.
I had no money, but I had some friends and acquaintances and a couple of enemies, and we got together and we all agreed, came to a consensus that yes, let's have a newspaper.
In January 1992, the Eastern Door was born.
There was only like 1,500 domiciles here, but I was selling like 2,000 or 3,000 papers. And other people have told me that the Eastern Door helped heal the community in that time of recovery from the crisis.
Dr. Deere has made his mark in many areas, including education, the media, and the international politics.
Last year, Deere was recognized by the Quebec government for his contributions to journalism. In turn, he recognizes a new generation of Indigenous journalists.
There's a tremendous interest now in journalism that wasn't there before. It takes practice. Very few people are born journalists. You have to practice journalism.
Colonialism has taught us, to destroy ourselves. 1990, I was 14 years old, and I was just kind of coming into my own, and it was like it fast-forwarded my whatever I was, whatever my persona was, whatever I thought I'd be. It was like, boom, here we go. You're going to be this now. You have no choice.
Steve Bonspiel is now the editor-publisher of the Eastern Door. But the Indigenous journalism class he teaches at Concordia University is so popular, he says it filled to capacity minutes after opening for registration.
One of the main things I tell them is you're not going to be able to learn 500 years of colonialism that is on our shoulders, but you better damn well learn about that story that you're covering.
Besieged warriors have repeatedly taunted the military. This one tossing flares at 2 soldiers standing guard overnight.
As a teen, Bonspiel was marked by how his home community, Ganazadage, was depicted in the mainstream.
It was hard to get a fair story. I mean, I was pretty young, so to me, all coverage was biased because I could see, 6 o'clock news, I'd pick apart. They're using Indian again. Oh, they said, this, they use these words. They don't care because they're not catering to us as viewers. They don't even care that we're watching.
The soldiers showed restraint as individuals taunted them, swore at them, and then began jostling the troops.
Today, he's teaching a new crop, the Indigenous style guide of reporting as he sees it.
I think that the sickness that happens too in mainstream is you forget about our communities until there's something big that happens. APTN changed that.
It's been just over a year since the official birth of Nunavut.
10 years after the siege, the world's first ever Indigenous broadcaster, APTN, made its debut. Dan David, APTN's first news director, is from Ganazadage. We asked if the 1990 occupation at all influenced his leadership at the time.
Everything had everything to do with it. it's not just because you're hiring people who are brown and red and, you know, other color under the rainbow. It's the fact that you've got people who are questioning, not just outside, not just Canada or whatever province they happen to be reporting in, but they're questioning themselves. And I think that that's critical. Way back, like about 40 years, we understood that there had to be a change. There had to be a change in the newsrooms itself. We needed to have Indigenous voices. And that's really what I think the Oka crisis was all about, wanting to be heard, demanding to be heard and understood.
Making change in the media major leagues takes time, but in the 30 years since the standoff, the communities involved have mobilized. Kahnawake now has 2 weekly newspapers and a radio station operating on the territory. Bonspiel had plans to launch a paper in Kahnawake in 2020 until COVID hit.
This is RKR 101.7 FM, reviving Kahnawake Radio.
But even during quarantine, the community managed to get their radio station back on the air.
They need as many outlets, creatively, expressively, anything to get them out there to say, we are proud and you should support us, because we're not just about the crisis. You know, we're a living, breathing, caring community that wants to move forward.
The Vian Commission final report backs this up. Although media is slowly improving their response, it found, quote, the problem lies in the persistence of certain ideological biases, which many believe were reinforced by the events at Oka in the early 1990s. The report itself might not offer the framework needed to force improvements to news coverage, but at least in some parts of the Mohawk Nation, the improvements have already come from within. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Tiohtià:ke, Montreal.
We have to take one more break, but still to come, a group of Indigenous women business owners look to lend a helping hand in the Yukon. Welcome back. Like most other retailers, Indigenous-owned businesses have also been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. A group of Indigenous women business owners are calling on major Canadian retailers to lend a helping hand. Here's Sarah Connors with that story from the Yukon.
This will be okay, but obviously sales are so much less, especially without the tourism.
It's been a tough year for Nacho Nyaktan soap maker Joella Hogan. With few tourists in the Yukon this summer and no cruise ships, business has been bust.
It was really, I guess, a punch in the gut because I realized how much my business really depends on tourism and the cruise line industry, because so many of the shops that carry my stuff are also supported by that industry.
Along with 20 other Indigenous women entrepreneurs, Hogan is now calling on major retailers to pledge 15% of their shelf space to Indigenous-owned businesses and help those struggling from the pandemic get back on their feet.
We're not necessarily represented, certainly not in retail space, but also in many industries. And so how do we encourage and support retailers to make that shift and support small businesses, because realizing the impact is so much larger when you invest and support Indigenous business.
Inspired by a similar pledge in the U.S. after the death of George Floyd, entrepreneurs like Hogan say it's time for Indigenous businesses to reap the profits, which usually isn't the case.
people are selling items with Indigenous graphics or images on them which aren't appropriate or Indigenous made. And so you're not supporting Indigenous people and communities when you're retailing those products.
Indigenous-owned brands are almost non-existent in the major Canadian retail space. Hudson's Bay Company, for instance, which carries about 1,800 brands, only carries one Indigenous-owned brand. And other major retailers like Simon's, Holt Renfrew, and Shoppers Drug Mart don't carry any. And while local shops like this one have been supportive, most major retailers have not responded to the pledge.
Some of them have made statements on them, some of them haven't. Some of them are mute, which is pretty disappointing because there's so many opportunities.
Despite the lack of response, Hogan says it's the message, not the money, that makes the pledge worth it for retailers.
There are so many beautiful things that are coming from Indigenous communities, and how can we as Canadians support that so that all people can thrive?
Most companies I reached out to about the pledge did not get back to me. However, Hudson's Bay Company did tell me a diversity and inclusion task force is now in the works. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
In early September, a Costco opened its doors on the Tsuut'ina First Nation in Alberta. It's the first time the big box store has opened on Indigenous land, and according to Costco, it's the most successful location in all of Western Canada. Tamara Pimentel has the story.
This is how Keith Smallboy starts off every workday, prepping to open the tire shop at the new Costco on Tsuut'ina Nation.
It's a way to build a career, because there's not many of that out there for us Indigenous and the youth. So we both understand that being here is a great opportunity.
I declare this Costco now open.
This Costco opened in August. It created over 80 jobs for Tsuut'ina and Calgary residents, and it's the first to be built on First Nations land and run by First Nations people.
It actually shows that economic development can happen on reserve.
Bryce Starlight is with Taza, the nation's development project, which the Costco is a part of. He says this location is the most successfully performing Costco in Western Canada.
From our discussions with Costco, they've indicated that this location has broken records. So it's a record-breaking location. And it really, the sales are phenomenal as a result of the great access and also the underserviced market in Southwest Calgary.
And for Smallboy, opportunities like this don't come around very often.
It was kind of hard for me to get employed anywhere, I guess you could say.
He says it gives Indigenous youth hope, builds confidence and community spirit.
People here, this Costco specifically, they're really tuned to like helping Indigenous thrive. You know, I have a good manager who really wants me to see me with a white shirt. I think it's really important that we do have opportunities like this as much as we can on each reservation.
So like every morning, Keith Smallboy opens the doors and is ready to welcome customers onto Tsuut'ina land. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News on the Tsuut'ina Nation.
That's our show for this Boxing Day edition of APTN National News Weekend. But before we go, we leave you with the Red Lake, Minnesota Boys and Girls Club starring in a hip-hop video called I'm Anishinaabe. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend.
On the ground, say me quick for my life, cause creator hold it down through the days and the nights. And I'ma tell you now that this native hella proud, so I say it loud. And I gotta burn sage when I'm starting up my day, cause I am Ojibwe, all pain on my face, man, I'm feeling really ace. When they ask about my race, hey, I'ma say Mac soup and wild rice, I got the whole family grubbing. It's powwow time for the whole tribe buzzing. Everybody giving daps, I got about 100 cousins, let me tell you something. And I show my people love, give my grandmother hugs, and we give respect to the people living in the struggle. We indigenize the youth, that's the way we we rising up, so I let them know what's up. Turtle Island, but Anishinaabe people see we came from the east. All my people in the woods, all my Nijis in the streets, all my Aimsters and Chiefs, but to say the least. Throw your fist in the air, let them know we still here. Sit inside the circle of the sweat, Lord, say a prayer. Hunters, storytellers, warriors with no fear, let's make it clear.